While we wait to see if Israel Adesanya will get his revenge against the only fighter to knock him out before, it's a good time to reflect on the gravity of the challenge in front of Izzy. The middleweight champion will go head-to-head with his former foe, Alex Pereira, in one of the year's most anticipated fights. So just how much of a threat is Pereira? Plus, stay tuned as we count down some of his best knockouts to showcase the talents of the Brazilian kickboxer. All that is coming up next. First, Pereira's stunning UFC rise. Look at Alex Pereira's MMA record. You might think that the red carpet was laid out for his UFC career, and that's because it was. Despite having only 3 wins at the promotion, he's been given a title shot against reigning champion Israel Adesanya. But Dana White has been open about that. He knows that fans want to see the fight. Why? Because Pereira is the only man to have knocked out Adesanya in his professional career. It was back in their kickboxing days, and Adesanya lost twice to Pereira. And with Adesanya running out of top opponents to defend his belt against, Pereira offers a great event for the UFC. There's a great backstory, and Adesanya welcomed the chance to set the record straight and prove to Pereira that MMA is an entirely different world than kickboxing. If Pereira fails against Adesanya at UFC 281, he might fade as quickly as he emerged. But the way he has run through fighters like Bruno Silva and Sean Strickland gives a lot of weight to the argument that Pereira has the best chance of breaking his unbeaten run in the middleweight division. Looking back at some of Pereira's biggest knockouts, one thing is clear. If Adesanya wants to win, he'll have to do anything he can to avoid the left hook of Alex Pereira. Izzy has confidently claimed that Pereira isn't experienced enough in the dynamic world of MMA to pose a threat, which means that he'll probably be trying to mix it up with some ground game. But no doubt Pereira will be desperate to keep the fight on their feet. We could be heading for another record KO as we saw between Jorge Masvidal and Ben Askren. So let's count down the top 5 Pereira knockouts. Number 5. Alex Pereira vs Israel Adesanya 2. Before Adesanya ever stepped foot inside the octagon, he was already an accomplished fighter. But instead of MMA, his trade was kickboxing. If it weren't for Alex Pereira, Adesanya probably would have dominated the kickboxing world just like he's doing in the UFC. Unfortunately, Pereira jumped at any opportunity to fight Izzy, and his record speaks for itself. They met in 2016 and then in 2017. For the rematch in 2017, Pereira had a special surprise for Adesanya. The style bender had the edge for most of the fight and had made enough changes to his game to avenge his first loss to Pereira. But in the 3rd round, Pereira hit Adesanya with his trademark left hook, and it was lights out. Adesanya was knocked out cold, and he took minutes to recover. Izzy's record is almost perfect, but that night in Sao Paulo is a big question mark on his career. Since Pereira debuted in the UFC, fans have wondered whether we are about to see the end of Adesanya's time at the top. No one seems more eager to answer that question than Adesanya himself. Can he avoid Pereira's knockout power? And has Pereira adapted his style enough for MMA? On November the 13th at UFC 281, we'll all find out. Number 4. Alex Pereira vs Jason Wilness. Like the top UFC divisions, the kickbox elite can be a small circle. That's why at GLORY 65 back in 2017, Alex Pereira met his rival Jason Wilness for the 3rd time in his career. Wilness had won their first 2 bouts, with a TKO ending the first one. It's not often that Pereira has lost in his career, so there was a score to settle. This spurred Pereira on to finish the fight spectacularly and make a statement. And it didn't take long for Wilness to learn that he was facing a very different fighter than he'd faced just a year earlier. Straight out of the gate, Pereira put the pressure on, putting Wilness on the back foot and eventually knocking him down for the count. The Dutchman returned to his feet, but maybe he shouldn't have. Pereira put him back to the floor with a heavy punch moments later. Once again, Wilness got up again, but once again, not for long. This time, Pereira chose a different weapon from his arsenal. He ended the fight with a brutal flying knee, destroying Wilness's face and showing exactly why he's one of the most feared strikers in the world. Pereira's flying knee was more than just a fancy way to finish the fight. It was also a warning shot that he has a dynamic kickboxing style that's hard to prepare for. That's what Adesanya will have to be ready for if he wants to defend his middleweight title for the 5th time. Up next, who didn't move for 5 minutes after Pereira was done with him? And why does Ariel Helwani think the Brazilian is one of the scariest fighters he's ever seen? So don't go anywhere. Number 3. Alex Pereira vs Donegi Abina. Once again, this next one was before Pereira's time in the UFC. It was 2019 and the middleweight was on his way to MMA stardom, but he moved up to light heavyweight to face Donegi Abina after running out of challengers for his middleweight belt. Just as expected, Pereira didn't leave the 5th to a decision. Even though Abina had a good fight in the first couple of rounds, Pereira's firepower was too much in the long run. Abina avoided it until the 3rd round when Pereira hit Abina with a left hook and sent Abina face-planting to the floor. The Brazilian moved out of the way as Abina was knocked out cold. He knew that there was no follow-up needed. When he lands his famous left hook, there is rarely anything after. It even knocked out Israel Adesanya and has already knocked out 2 UFC fighters. Pereira confidently walked off, silently celebrating in his ice-cold fashion. And just like that, after one punch, Pereira was a double world champion, holding both the middleweight and light heavyweight belts spectacularly. His fights in kickboxing have almost looked too easy for him. Let's hope that UFC fighters will give him more of a run for his money. Number 2. Alex Pereira vs. Arturo Barak. It didn't take long after becoming a 2-division champion for Pereira to reassert his territory back in the middleweight division. He would be defending his crown at GLORY Collision 2 in the Netherlands, and facing Pereira was the Turkish-Dutch fighter Arturo Barak, hoping to give his hometown fans something to cheer about. Barak had been hovering around the top 10 for years and was coming off the back of 2 straight wins against Donovan Weiss and Jacob Seibin. But like everyone else on this list, Barak soon learned that fighting Pereira is a very different challenge, and no one has quite figured out how to handle him. He lasted 3 minutes against the Brazilian, which could be seen as an achievement. Those might have been the longest 3 minutes in his career though. Poatan, as Pereira is known, utterly dominated Barak from start to finish, and just towards the end of the first round, he unleashed a powerful left hook, took one glance at his opponent, and saw that it was game over. The home ground fans didn't get what they wanted, but instead had front row seats to a masterclass on striking. It was Pereira's third last fight in kickboxing, and he ensured that his legacy would live long after he left the sport, but not before one classic performance. Number 1. Alex Pereira vs. Thomas Powell. Poatan wanted to leave the kickboxing world with a bang, and his last fight before joining the UFC was at LFA 95. The UFC was so excited about their next prospect that they broadcast the fight on their service Fight Pass. Those who tuned in were in for a treat, and it was a sign of what Pereira planned to bring to the biggest MMA promotion in the world. Toward the end of the first round, the Brazilian looked as comfortable as ever, and in a pattern we've come to expect from the kickboxer, Pereira started with a head kick, opening up Powell to a lethal left hook that slumped him forwards and ended the fight immediately. As if the knockout wasn't bad enough, what happened afterwards that stunned everyone was MMA journalist Ariel Helwani described the knockout as one of the scariest he had ever seen because his opponent didn't move for approximately 5 minutes. The frightening kill shot introduced Pereira to the MMA world as a true force to be reckoned with. We may have never seen this kind of knockout before in the UFC. Other names that come close to these kinds of finishing skills are Chuck Liddell and Francis Ngannou. Which of Pereira's knockouts was your favorite? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again at the next one.